I never had to deal with anxiety ever. Never even knew what it was. And then for about 2 weeks straight, I remember dealing with a chest pain that I felt was something was wrong with me. I learned at a young age to not talk about things. And as a leader for a long time, you don't talk about it. It's a sign of weakness. But finally, I just said, there's something wrong. And at that moment, I just said to myself, try anything to make myself better, figure this out. Spiritually, God has his time. It's on his timing, not my timing.
The views and opinions in this podcast do not represent the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, or United States Marine Corps.
After their deployment in 2008, some called them the Forgotten Battalion. But the Marines and sailors of the United States Marine Corps' 2nd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment reject the way the Forgotten Battalion moniker encourages that narrative of broken veterans. Instead, these warriors simply want to be remembered for the mission they accomplished and for the honor with which they have served their country and their Corps. The majority of 2-7 veterans continue to reflect on their experiences while living their lives and pressing forward. These are their personal stories of resilience, with insight to healthy coping and living with hope. Welcome to the Warriors Roundtable. Today on the Roundtable, part 2 of our interview with former 2-7 Staff Sergeant Marcus Hernandez.
I think that if veterans are more open to talking about what it is they went through, you'll never know what you can learn from somebody else and what you can relate to them about. And I feel, the misconception of no one's going to understand is really just, that it's a misconception on both ends. And really a way of just keeping yourself down, keeping yourself, in that negative state of no one's going to understand, because that's where it's going to keep you.
If I imagine you might have both husbands and wives, for those who are of your Marines who are married, or even those who aren't, they've got family. It's probably a similar situation. They may not want to talk to mom or dad or siblings. If you were to sit and talk with them right now, what would you say to your Marine who, like you, feels like, I don't, part of me wants to talk, but no, I'm not going to say anything, or I don't want to say anything? And what would you say to the wife or the family member that was sitting there?
I would first tell the Marine that, try to learn from my experience, and give them the advice that, it's okay, to talk about things as hard as it is. Even if you have to, write them down and then give them to your spouse or your family member. And I would tell, a spouse or family member, don't accuse them of, not wanting to talk. I think that makes it even worse. I know, or, don't give them that you don't want to talk to me about it because I don't understand. That I think, that makes me not want to talk. And be patient. I think with patience and love, it definitely will happen. And I think that's what happened with me. She wasn't patient, my wife, but she was patient enough to where I finally was able to open up. But I had to be okay with myself first before, and I would say, to any spouse or family member, is keep encouraging them. Encouragement's going to go, it isn't negative in any way. But if you put them individual down for not talking about what they're going through, or say, oh, you have PTSD, that's why you're doing it. I think those types of statements, those you statements, are what prevents guys or girls that are dealing with PTS, prevents them from wanting to talk about it. Is a you statement. You're only doing this for whatever reason or whatever. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It sort of puts them in a box, gives them a label, doesn't treat them as a person. And it almost feels like you're being sort of patronized. You talk a little bit about how you had to get help for yourself first. You had to figure some things out for yourself first. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of things that you have done either since your last deployment or since retiring that have helped you?
So for me, it was a lot of things. I remember asking for help. I think it came to that point. I felt like I was never had to deal with anxiety ever. Never even knew what it was. And then for about 2 weeks straight, I remember dealing with a chest pain that I felt something was wrong with me. And it came out of nowhere. I think I was back in 29 Palms and trying to, figure things out. My marriage was not, I would say that was another part of it. I had lost a little brother prior to that, prior to me going to 29 Palms. And I think it was accumulation where, I gave the analogy of a steam pot or of a kettle pot that I could only hold so much in. I learned at a young age to not talk about things. And as a leader for a long time, you don't talk about it. It's a sign of weakness. And I think that's one thing the Marine Corps is good at doing. Mission first is always the thing. But finally, I just said, there's something wrong. And I worked at the time, I was in Afghanistan, and I worked for Army Colonel. And he suggested that I seek, I think it was deployment health or deployment stress, whatever it was with the Army. And they found out I wasn't sleeping, and there was a lot of other things involved in there. And that was kind of my first step. They kind of led me down the path of getting some help. But at the same time, I also felt like a failure for asking for help. I think I felt worse once I asked for help, I felt worse. And I really went into a deeper hole. I call it a deep, dark hole. I went into the deeper hole because more and more, nothing was going. What I thought was I'm doing everything, but nothing's working.
Yeah.
So I went to a lot of counseling. I got placed in outpatient over at Wounded Warrior there at Pendleton, where I went to outpatient care for 2 months. And that's where I kind of learned to talk about things and kind of be open to things. And I think one of the things that I felt like one of the biggest things I felt is I didn't want to be a burden to anybody because I was tired of feeling this way. And I remember telling that to a therapist. And I go, I just don't want to be around here no more. I don't want to be on this earth no more because I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to burden anybody. And I think when I got to that point, she made a statement of, think about your kids, think about these things, but think about, if you do decide to do that, your kids there's a higher probability of your children to follow the same path. And I'll never forget, I cried my eyes out for a good while after that, almost like the rest of the day. I couldn't figure out why I was where I was. And at that moment, I just said to myself, try anything to make myself better, figure this out. So I did a lot of self-help things. I read books, I read a lot of things. I went to a couple different therapists. I did some acupuncture. I did, a variety of different things. I talked about it more with other individuals. And I went to Mighty Oaks retreat there in Paso Robles. I did that, and I learned a lot there as well. And I learned more from the guys that I was there with that were dealing with the same things. I think a lot of what I felt was I was the only one dealing with this, and no one would understand what I'm dealing with. And it was a negative thing that I was lying to myself in that aspect.
Yeah.
When I found out there was other individuals dealing with the same things that I was dealing with, I think that opened up, for me, it helped me open up about everything that I dealt with, from the time I was a kid to, present day. But even now I get with other I work with veterans groups, and I talk with them, give them my experience. and I go over things, how I kind of open myself up and not close myself off.
Sure. Now you referenced Mighty Oaks, if I'm remembering correctly. That was started by a former, is it a recon Marine?
Former recon Marine, Chad Robichaud. Started by very good program, especially if you're at the point where you'll just try anything. And I went there with an open mind, an open heart, and definitely came out a lot better. Definitely did.
You have other combat vets who have experienced combat stress that are in there with you, and I imagine that was a big part of the healing process for you, was just being with other people who had gone through the same thing and were at the same point in life where they realized whatever they were doing wasn't working, and they needed to reach out for some help and talk a little bit about what their experiences and what was going on internally. Was there anything in particular about that program or any of the programs that you've been through that you found helpful? Was there anything that was a sort of a milestone moment for you in your own growth process?
I would say I've taken something from every program. I wouldn't say there's one particular thing. And I think that's how individuals should look at it as. There's not a pill. There's not one thing that is going to help an individual. It is several different things, and opening up and then mixing those up to make the better you. And I think that's what I've done to make the better version of me, is try a little bit of everything. Because I got put on a lot of medication for what I was dealing with. I think I had like 5 different medications, and couldn't even get out of bed. And I'd never been that way in my life. I can go back. I had a paper route when I was 11, and I was always first one up, that type of person. And I was struggling at getting up at 8:00 in the morning, which was not me. And I finally got to the point, even after I retired, was to dump everything. And I picked up, a little bit more physical fitness, and started working with other veterans, trying to help them, give back to them, and just being around other like-minded individuals that have the same experiences, that may or may not be going through what you're going through already, or what you had gone through, and trying to help them. And I think just like if you're in the Marine Corps or if you're still active duty, you're always trying to help the guy next to your left and right. And I think that's how I look at it now. I'm always trying to help an individual to my left or right, even now that I'm out. And I think finding that purpose is probably the most beneficial thing, is finding a purpose of, wanting to continue to give back in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find, now from a different perspective, we talked a lot about combat stress, your growth process. And I love what you had to say about how it really is sort of a multidiscipline approach, or, you've got to bring different solutions to bear on the problem. It's never, or rarely, one sort of single thing that helps us grow. It's just like with anything else. Physically, if I want to grow, I've got to eat right. I've got to work out. I've got to get enough sleep. I got to hydrate. It's the same with our emotional or spiritual selves. It's sort of a multidisciplinary approach. But on a different note, when you think back to those experiences, is there anything you're thankful for? Or is there anything in those experiences that's made you a better person?
I've never even thought of it that way. I would say, sir, that I think it's all molded me to who I am today. I don't know that I can say one particular experience. Actually, I can. It was an individual that said, it was a person it was my friend Mikhail, who's a ranger, who started Ranger Road. And I remember complaining to him about going to VA appointments and having to continue to talk about things. And I think, I was just in a negative state of mind. The guy is super positive, and he just said, and it was just a text message. He just like, just know that you did everything you could that day. He's like, there's no doubt in my mind that you made the best decision. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever been told that. And I think that was like the breakthrough moment of, I think that was the breakthrough moment for me to get out of this. It's my fault they got hit. It's my fault. These guys, didn't do this or do that while we were on deployment. And I think I kept loathing and using that as a way of trying to not better myself, just stay in that state of mind. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know that I was doing that until, he had told me that. And it was just, I'll never forget. I went home and I told my wife, and I was like, I've never felt so, like I've never had anybody just say, you did everything you could that day. I may have, but I don't think I was ready for it. Mm. And I think, spiritually, God has his time. It's on his timing, not my timing.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened.
Well, it's amazing. We have an incredible capacity to think that everything was within our control. And if we had just done something differently, there would have been a different outcome. You mentioned sort of just in passing Ranger Road. I've not been there, but another great resource for folks to potentially tap into.
Yeah, so it's a veteran nonprofit here in the Northern California area, but kind of go everywhere, do different things. And it's getting guys together to physical fitness activities, kind of share that camaraderie all over again. We do all sorts of different things. We do a lot of hunting, scuba diving, skydiving, and it's bringing the veterans together and, doing things that maybe they wouldn't do or didn't want to get off the couch to do.
Yeah.
And we joke and tease each other, each service. And it's a good group of guys. You get around these guys or some of the veterans that are, wounded in some fashion, and, you make it look like, it's not so bad anymore. I'm with the guys again, or I'm with the girls again, or whatever, it is. We're around each other again. We're joking, we're teasing, and hey, we're going to go run, or we're going to go do this together. But it's sharing that shared adversity all over again. And I think probably most Marines and most service members miss that shared adversity of whatever it is they went through. Because a lot of what I have found so far, everything is individual outside the military, unless you're part of a team. But that shared adversity of the cold night in Bridgeport that you guys were, snuggling in a sleeping bag, you never forget it, but it's, you're thankful for it and you joke about it. And, people don't understand, how could you like that? You share things with, with Marines or service members that you would not share with, whatever it is, but you can, whatever team you're a part of. And I learned this from Matt O'Donnell is, I've been a part of a team my whole life, sports, everything. So if you create a team around you, then that is going to be your team. There's going to be shared adversity. There's going to be triumphs and tribulations. And, you're going to be that much of a better team. And I think I learned so much from Matt, even when we were working together on a mountain in Afghanistan, that it's like I try to still carry that forward. It's that team concept of life. I mean, I think there's, almost like your own tribe, building people around you that are going to help you out, people that are going to, lead you to better yourself, not to a negative area.
If somebody's listening to this and feeling that sense of disconnectedness, what would you recommend for them as a way of getting maybe reconnected? Or for Marines from 2-7, I'm thinking even most specifically, what would be something you'd encourage them to do to try to make sure they get reintegrated with that network?
I would say try to go back to who you were before you joined. Not saying getting into the bad stuff, but I think you have to go back to what you liked, your hobbies. Okay. and I'll talk specifically. We have a Marine that we work with here. He's a double amputee, and he likes scuba diving, and so we assisted him in getting a certification to be an instructor, and now he's instructing veterans on diving. I think you have to do what your true love was or what your hobbies were before you join, and everybody has a hobby for the most part, I would say. And I think for me, I was baseball. I loved baseball, and loved going to games, and I've gone since I've been out. I've gone to spring training the last couple of years. Spring training trip in Arizona. Take my boys to baseball games as much as I can, whether it be a AAA high school game, something where they're around sports, and to see them enjoy it as much as I do. And sometimes it's just giving them candy and sit down, but I still enjoy the game, and I enjoy it so much that it's like almost it's like therapy. And it's also finding new things. There's the ocean, going to the ocean, doing something there, opening yourself up to something new or something you might like. Right. I think we find that a lot with working with veterans. What did you used to like, or what did you want to try to do that you haven't done, that type of thing. And I think that's how you start breaking individuals out of their shell is, what did you like to do before, before you started feeling like this, or, where you didn't want to do anything anymore, what'd you do before you joined the military, that type of thing. So that's what I think would help an individual, break out of that shell. But
start to reconnect with people, maybe with some like-mindedness. And the other thing I love about what you just said, it's unrelated to the relational aspect, but a lot of times I find that when people get stuck because of reliving either an event or a series of events that they experienced in deployment, when they become depressed, a lot of times what happens is they have allowed either an event or a season of life to define who they are, rather than it being a part of who they are. Inevitably, it's going to be a permanent part of you and your story, but it's not you. There's so much more to Marcus Hernandez than what he did in a deployment, or in the worst moment you might have had in Afghanistan, or even your whole time in the Marine Corps. There's so much more. And by doing what you just suggested, finding things that you enjoyed doing before you ever even became a Marine or a soldier or an airman or whatever, a sailor, you essentially continue to live your life. You continue to write your story, and you don't allow yourself to be defined by a moment or a season. And I think that's a really important part to moving on. You're never going to extract the combat stress or the post-traumatic stress that you experience from who you are, but you can continue to grow from it. So that's really neat. Is there a way that folks we can always link it in show notes afterwards, but is there a way that folks could get in touch with Ranger Road specifically?
rangerroad.org. You can look us up. You can look them up on there, on the internet, on there.
Okay.
Other things
great.
that I think that I used to do at a younger age too, sir, was anniversary dates of different events that happened in my life. I think a big thing amongst service members is drink it away.
Yeah.
And it became such a habit that, it started getting into my life and how I felt about things, but it never cured anything. It just made it worse. And I think if individuals, instead of maybe drinking, they're, celebrate it. And I think what I've changed in my life is I don't drink anymore on anniversary days, significant events. Instead I either have a nice dinner with my family specifically, and I talk about it, of what happened, because I mean, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get any better.
Yeah.
By drinking it away every year. In fact, you're just, making it worse for yourself. But I have found that if I make a celebration of it or a dinner of it and, talk about it, my sons or my family will know why we're sitting down today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I found. And it's a lot of it's habit, breaking those old habits of what we did to deal with the bad stuff. And I think that would help individuals as well, is breaking those bad habits of what we do to, to think of, the guys that didn't come home or anything like that, or anything, traumatic.
And that takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to identify those things first, but then the humility to be able to say, I know that on this day or in these moments, this is not a good, I'm not at a good place. And me, in the specific case that you just mentioned, me having alcohol is not a good idea. Even if maybe that's the tradition from your experience with the folks you grew up with or your family or the Marine Corps, it really doesn't matter. If you know that's something that you need to sort of protect yourself from, to keep yourself from spiraling down in those bad moments, you got to absolutely be intentional about it. That's good. And on the positive, like you also indicated, not just avoiding the things that cause you to further spiral, but reaching out to those people and resources that can kind of buoy you in those times. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't go into combat without your Kevlar, your flak and Kevlar. You wouldn't knowingly drive or walk right into an ambush. Once you have the information, once you know that something is an area of weakness, you do what you can to then protect yourself from allowing yourself to be hurt by that in the future. And that's a great recommendation. As we kind of wrap this up, Marcus, going forward, there may be young men who listen to this who have not yet been to combat, haven't even done their first deployment. What would you share with them if you had an opportunity to give them words of wisdom from Marcus Hernandez?
I would say first, there's nothing in the world that's like it, sharing those moments with the guy to your left and your right. Mm. But don't keep those moments to yourself. Get them down on paper, but make sure you get them out. Don't hold it in, because it's not going to do, for one, it's not going to do that individual good, any good. It's just going to, especially if it's something bad, you got to talk about it. And I think whether you talk about it with your God, with, you write it on paper, your family, you got to have somebody to talk about it with. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I didn't do. And, from, basically 15 years or 12 years of combat dealing with that, and, put on with how I grew up, I didn't talk about it with anybody. And, I got to a point in my life where I didn't want to deal with it anymore. And it was the wrong point, and I should not have waited that long. I think that's what I would tell somebody, that first come into the military and was asking for advice. And, surround yourself with people that are going to allow you to talk about it. And they're going to call you out when they know you're bad.
Yeah.
And I think keeping those things in mind, I think they would help out a lot of people. I know it would help me out if I had known, years ago, but with God's timing, that's not what he wanted. He wanted me to learn. So, and that's what I've done.
Well, it's, we often, like you said earlier, we often think talking about this stuff is a sign of weakness, and it actually takes a very strong person to sort of be able to face that, the darkness, the monster, these challenges in your own emotions, and not be afraid of them, or not being afraid of what somebody else might think of your reputation. It actually is I believe it's a sign of real strength. And then you allow others, your fire team essentially, to come in and come alongside of you and support you. And there's nothing like it. That's great. Well, Marcus, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, to talk a little bit about your story. Much more importantly, I'm sure that folks who are listening can take a lot of things from it. They can not only hear your story, but probably make points of contact to their own life and their own challenges, their own adversity, and how to overcome it. And I also want to thank your lovely bride for being willing to take care of take care of the two boys while you pulled out for an hour and a half or so, and we had a chance to catch up and talk. So I look forward to chatting again, and if you'd be willing sometime in the future, maybe we can do this again.
Of course. No worries. Thank you for having me.